Welcome to the first unit. This is called Foundations in Entrepreneurship. And what I would like to do in this unit is to give you a background to what entrepreneurship means, particularly from a theoretical basis. We're going to look at a video from Steve Jobs talking about his journey.
If I never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart even when it leads you off the well-worn path, and that will make all the difference. My second story is about love and loss. I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life, when I was 20. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love, and that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking, and don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And like any great relationship, it just gets better and better as the years roll on. So keep looking. Don't settle. My third story is about death. When I was 17, I read a quote that went something like, "If you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right." It made an impression on me, and since then, for the past 33 years, I have looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet, death is the destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. Right now, the new is you. But someday, not too long from now, you will actually become the old and be cleared away. Sorry to be so dramatic, but it's quite true. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. Were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And I have always wished that for myself. And now, as you graduate to begin anew, I wish that for you. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you all very much.
So that was a great talk from Steve Jobs. I particularly like the story about dropping into the calligraphy class. It's often cited that Jobs had no university, did not complete university, had no university education. Yet he did learn things at the university which had a profound impact upon his technical decisions, his product decisions moving forward. And the calligraphy is a good example, where he positioned the Apple Macintosh in its very earliest days was as the desktop publishing solution. And that came from his personal attention to detail around the formation of letters, calligraphy. So he learned something there that he didn't know at the time that he was going to use as he developed the Apple computer. But it became a very important part, something that he would carry forward with him. Let's look now at the technical description, the academic description of entrepreneurship. Now, Joseph Schumpeter is somebody that you need to get to know. You need to get to know his writings very well. He was a contemporary of Marx and Engels. He saw no difference between the social upheaval of the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, and entrepreneurship. Creative destruction, a phrase developed by Schumpeter, referring to entrepreneurship, could also have been applied to Europe at that time. He saw the beginnings of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia as creative destruction. But applying it to entrepreneurship, he says entrepreneurship is the carrying out of new combinations we call enterprise. The individuals whose function it is to carry them out we call entrepreneurs. Stevenson and Girillo refer to entrepreneurship as a process by which individuals, either on their own or inside organizations, pursue opportunities without regard to the resources they currently control. That's the key message here. Without regard to the resources that they currently control. Most corporate planning is about the allocation of resources. Excuse me. A strategy plan, a budget for the next year is about allocation of resources. Corporate strategy, more than anything else, is about figuring out how you're going to determine where to place the resources that you have under control. Where will you spend your capital? Where will you apply your people? Which markets will you approach? Which products will you pursue? If you had no constraints on resources, well, you would follow everything. So strategy, corporate strategy, is about, I have limited resources. Where am I going to place them? An entrepreneur, on the other hand, says, I don't have any resources, but I am going to pursue this opportunity. I will figure it out as I go along, or I will come up with a way of approaching the opportunity which requires less resources or different resources, changing the way that you approach markets. This is the key. The entrepreneur always searches for change, responds to it, and it exploits it as an opportunity. Very similar. This from Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker, of course, is the guru of management theory, and we will come on to him a little bit later. Successful entrepreneurs are seen as heroic. Now, this class is about project management. Project managers, on the other hand, are seen as imposing constraints that slow down getting things done. We're going to explore this over the next few weeks together. What are the implications for these descriptions? Often entrepreneurs are driven by the idea first before they have the resources to actually achieve it. Going back to that description by Stevenson and Girillo. It's about pursuing something despite not having the resources. The issue is to choose the right time in the cycle to introduce the right process. The best result is to combine both kinds of thinking at the appropriate time. We'll come on. We'll do more of this in a moment. Okay, a very important academic in the world of entrepreneurship, Sarasvati, talks about effectual thinking versus causal thinking. Entrepreneurs, as differentiated from managerial or strategic thinking, because they think effectually, they think about the effects. They believe in a yet-to-be-made future that can be substantially shaped by human action. And they realize that to the extent that this human action can control the future, they need not expend energies trying to predict it. So instead of trying to predict where they're going, they're trying to determine the future and make other organizations adjust to it. Okay, I apologize for the appalling graphic. This is Geoffrey Moore's technology adoption life cycle. And there are 5 stages: innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. And in the in Moore's technology adoption life cycle, he looks at the development of high-tech markets. Innovators come in with new products. Those new products are attractive to a particular audience. Then they become attractive to early adopters. And early adopters have very particular characteristics in their behavior, their makeup, their purchasing decisions, their market behaviors. The profile of an early adopter is very different to the early majority. And just because you as an entrepreneur have achieved a certain level of adoption in that early market, it doesn't translate ordinarily to adoption in the early majority. The decision model of the majority is more about security and proof. Early adopters are driven by a different set of criteria. So the gap between moving from the early adopters to the early majority is referred to as the chasm. And most firms fall into the chasm. Moore's first book was called Crossing the Chasm. And this is the challenge for an entrepreneur. How do I take my success in the innovators and early adopters market, jump across the chasm into the early majority, and enter again what Moore refers to as the tornado? By the time we get to the peak of the early majority market, it's a mature market. We're in the main street. The late majority are finally starting to say, oh, gee, this internet thing is looking interesting. Maybe we should consider doing something in that space. But by that time, the next innovation is coming along. In order to cross the chasm, most entrepreneurs, most startups need to narrow their focus. You can't cross the chasm with a whole basket full of goodies. You have to be seen to be offering a solution in a very niche, narrow market. Only when you have started to build success in the main street, in the early majority, will that entrepreneur be able to expand their offering again. Google crossed the market with search. After achieving success, they expanded it. Atlassian crossed the chasm with Jira. After they built market share, they expanded into different products. That's how you do it. So the challenge: how does the entrepreneur follow enough process and discipline to be successful without stifling creativity? This is the entrepreneurial life cycle. New venture development is the initial foundation of the venture. In the startup activities, you need to create a business case. You need to understand what your market opportunities are, which market you're approaching, what problem you're solving. And we're going to cover a lot of that in this unit. It's really about managing that early stage and building the rigor necessary to cross the chasm. The growth stage is transitioning from an entrepreneurial business to a functioning enterprise. And we often hear that the entrepreneur is not the best CEO to take that business forward, and that a more mature business person is required to come in and run the business. Now, this is not necessarily the right way to do things. It's not always successful. Apple got rid of Steve Jobs, brought in John Scully, who was an experienced PepsiCo executive. Didn't really work out all that well. There is a growing sense amongst the venture capital community that it's often better to build the skills into the entrepreneur to become a good enterprise leader rather than bring someone in who is steeped in enterprise management to run an entrepreneurial startup. You also have to manage the later stages, stabilization, competing, and then decline and moving on to the next stage. Now, I have some very bad slides to go through here. So there is not a single instance of the technology adoption life cycle. There are multiple cycles. And just like a sine wave in electricity, each cycle gets shorter and more intense, significantly larger. So as one cycle is entering its late majority and declining stage, the next cycle is starting. And the chasm overlaps between stages. And so the question becomes, how do established players, if you've grown your business to a late majority, how do you then jump across to the next stage? Now, in the technology field, what we see is a lot of organizations trying to move from the client-server style architectures to internet and software as a service. Companies like Microsoft, Oracle, have had to try and figure out how to react to the growth of the internet, to a whole set of new players moving in. And they've had to move to that next cycle. For a lot of the companies, what they do is they buy emerging businesses because the DNA within the organization does not allow them to naturally grow these new technologies. They don't think like that. And you can see here just in 2 years, the staggering number of acquisitions that Oracle made in order to jump from the client-server technology adoption lifecycle to the internet technology adoption lifecycle. So, quick recap. An entrepreneur pursues an undertaking irrespective of the resources required. The entrepreneur will need to narrow their focus in order to build momentum and cross the chasm. Established players will often attempt to buy their entry into new markets. And every new cycle is more intense, larger and faster than the one that preceded it. If you're doing business in the client-server market, you are talking about hundreds of thousands of customers. If you're doing business in the internet, you're talking about millions, perhaps billions of customers. And the transition is much faster. It's very much more intense. Okay, that's all for this unit. Thank you.